Beloveds, we often begin our teaching with an embodied practice, but I felt like our confession prayer, our prayer of confession, was a beautiful embodied practice that invited us to touch one another. Today's sermon is about God's name, and I'm wondering, I know that as a community we've done this before, but I'm wondering if you can turn around and just introduce yourself to the person behind you, to the person next to you, and share your name. Just share your name. Look at how this building comes to life when we share one another's names. Okay, and I'm going to bring us back to the place, back to the sermon, back to our teaching this morning. You can get to know your neighbors a little bit more when we share the passing of the peace. So what's in a name? A famous line from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, a question for Romeo, which is important because a name indicated for him who was enemy to keep from associating with and to keep distance from, and who was friend, someone to keep close, someone who was safe, someone whom he could know intimately. After calling out to Moses and instructing him to remove his shoes, God announces God's self as the God of his father, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, yet does not provide a name. And this detail is significant because the ancient Israelites were not a monotheistic people at that time. They worshiped the God of their ancestors, as well as many other deities that were known by their neighbors, such as Baal, the fertility and storm god, and Asherah, the goddess of fertility. And also they were associated with, they knew the Egyptian gods. They were familiar with Ra, the supreme god, Isis, Osiris, Horus, Hathor, if I'm saying that right, Ptah, who were the gods of fertility, death, and kinship. But God did not name God's self as one of these many gods. God did not say, I am this God or I am that God, limiting God's self to one particular characteristic or affinity with a particular group of people or community. What God does say is that God had heard the suffering of my people, indicating a relationship and intimacy with the ancient Israelites. God met the people where they were at in their suffering and listened to their cries. Then, moved by their cries, God goes on to share their plan with Moses to liberate their people from their Egyptian oppressors. Then when Moses presses God for a name, God says, I am who I am. And here's when things get really wondrous and gorgeous, because God resists using a particular name for God's self, resisting being boxed into absolute terms like a storm god or desert god or fertility god. God referred to God's self in a way that invited infinite possibilities for everyone to meet God intimately in any capacity they needed, whether it was for comfort or healing or strength. The phrase, and I might butcher it, so anyone who speaks Hebrew, I'm saying sorry ahead of time. Ehyeh asher ehyeh is difficult to translate because it's not a noun. It's not a person, place, or thing, but a verb that is open and dynamic without fixed sense. It can mean I am who I am, but it can just as easily mean I will be who I am. I will be who I will be. God is saying, I am present with you now in your pain, in your fear, in your struggle, in your hope, and in your journey toward freedom. I will also be present for you in the tomorrow. This is not God locked in the past or confined in a temple. This is a God of becoming, the God who shows up and fulfills promises, the God who will be known in acts of liberation, the God whom Moses replies, "Here I am, Hineni," and then walks with him to break Pharaoh's chains. So now we can understand two things about the name of God from this passage. The first thing is that God desires intimacy with us and presence with us and meets us where we're at. Secondly, God desires to build a relationship with us, inviting us to experience the promise of who God is becoming. Now, it's pretty radical to think about this God in this immutable and infinite way, without limitations, without restrictions placed by our own human understanding. Because this means that our God is boundless. Our God is a boundless God who meets people where they are, whether it is in suffering or in joy. God is a boundless God who meets us across national and cultural diversity. God is so boundless that God is known by people in other faith traditions and practices by many names. The many names for God for Muslims, for Jews, for Sikhs, for Baha'is and Buddhists and indigenous and tribal communities, witches and wizards and mystics and scientists too. Because God is a boundless God, that means God's presence is across humanity. God's promises, that is who God will be, is also infinite and full of possibilities. When we say, "Here I am," to a boundless God, we become part of a journey of God becoming. And we, as a humanity, can become with God the way we were created to be, living and flourishing and basking in the goodness of all of God's creation together. Isn't that wondrous and gorgeous and delightful and beautiful? Yes. Amen. Whew. But the problem is, beloveds, that we keep trying to put God in a box. We shrink the infinite down to fit our fears and fit our boundaries. We say that there is only one true God, and then insist that God only carries one name, favors only one faith community, and blesses only one kind of people. Here in the United States, that box is labeled Christian nationalist God, whose name is misused to justify violence against people of other faiths. And when we do this, when we make God smaller than God is, we limit who gets to belong in God's family. We say this nation, but not that one. This culture, but not that one. This gender, this race, this orientation, but not those. We even try to limit who God will be in the world. We call God our liberator, but then we draw lines around who gets to be liberated and how. We say God is present everywhere, but then we restrict where God will move and through whom. We put limits on God's Spirit by deciding who God can use to continue God's mission. And perhaps, worst of all, we place limits on what we believe our future should be, leaving little space for God to actually take us beyond our imagination. The good news is that the God of the burning bush cannot be contained or controlled. Amen, beloveds? Say that to your neighbor. The God of the burning bush cannot be contained or controlled. For every attempt to place limits on God, there is someone willing to respond. There's someone who's got their hand up and says, "Here I am," ready to be an instrument of God's mission. Moses answered that call. He said, "Here I am," and then he removed his sandals. Yes, I'm removing my shoes, and if you want to, I invite you to do the same. Knowing that he was standing on holy ground. In that simple act, Moses showed intimacy and humility before God. A willingness to be vulnerable, even though he didn't know yet what he was signing up for. Now, in my culture, we have a practice of removing our shoes before we enter someone's home for two reasons. We don't want to track dirt from outside and germs into your home, and secondly, we remove our shoes as a sign of respect. Feet, though, in some cultures, are a part of your body that we don't typically show. In fact, even biblically, showing your feet is associated with some kind of intimacy. So when we take our shoes off in someone's home, we are entering into a stage of familiarity with the host, a step into relationship. We remove our shoes as a signal that we are no longer strangers, but we are entering into vulnerability, humility, intimacy, and a step into relationship. Who's ever taken their shoes off at someone's home? Did you know all that was going on? Here in this church, in this community that we call Riverside, we are all called in very particular and unique ways, each one of us. The God of many names meets us in our deepest need. This God, known to some as Comforter, who calls God by Comforter? Yeah. Known to others as Provider. God is provider to me sometimes. Meets us across cultures and even across the histories that we carry, and gathers us all together in this holy place. We remove our shoes and God invites us into relationship, into intimacy, into humility. God calls us to respond not with certainty. Moses wasn't certain about what was going to happen, but with openness. God calls us to say, "Here I am," and to remove our shoes, to set aside the things that weigh us down, to leave behind our ego, our fear, our limited vision, so that God can lead us somewhere unexpected, toward promises beyond what we could imagine. You might notice that I'm wearing sneakers. My daughter, not Misha, who is here being a burning bush, but my teenage daughter was the one who inspired me to wear sneakers. because I wore shoes on my feet that constrained me and hurt me, because society said a woman can only serve in a pulpit looking presentable, wearing heels, because as I've said many times before, I'm only 5'2". And I had to kick them off because they're not comfortable. They constrain me. And so I wear these dirty sneakers because they're comfortable, because I can do the work of God and I can say and do away with the way society expects me to be and go, I'm done. No. I'm gonna be humble here. Following the God of many names demands humility. It demands our willingness to be vulnerable, to stand here barefooted on this step. Did you know I have a step here too? It demands that we step out of the comfort of our own control and co-labor with God in the sacred work of liberation. So if you're willing to step into some vulnerability right now, take off your shoes. If you can. Those of you at home too. If you can reach, take off your shoes. Maybe shoes are hard to reach, I get it. Maybe you have a jacket on that's constraining you. Yep, I see your shoes. Brother, I see your shoes. Maybe there's something else that's constraining you. Maybe all of that is really uncomfortable right now and you're wearing day-old socks. That's okay. No shame. Open your hands. When we remove the barriers of our doubt, of mistrust in this place, our disappointment and worry, then we can make room for God to open new realms of possibility. Possibilities that we have never seen before. If you want that, church, say, "Here I am." Do you think Moses said it that way? Say, "Here I am." Here I am. That's right, because we have witnessed this. We have witnessed such possibilities in history. We saw it in the civil rights movement. We saw it in the Black Lives Matter movement, in the climate justice movement, in the Just Peace movement. Each of these movements moved forward because people dared to say, "Here I am." They dared to pivot, to evolve, and to reimagine. And they did all of this because they refused to be snuffed out. Armies or National Guard may march into Portland or Chicago, wherever else they want to go, but they will never snuff the people of God out. Because here's the truth, beloveds. Every time we try to limit God, God breaks the box. Every time we try to restrict who belongs, God widens the circle. Every time we say God cannot use that person, a black woman, a Latina woman, an Asian woman, every time someone says we cannot uplift a queer leader, God anoints them with fire. And every time we think the future can only be what we imagine, God blows our imagination wide open. The great I am, the God of many names, is not finished yet. Ooh, God is not finished yet in America. So hear this, church. Hear this, beloveds. Even amidst the smallness of Christian nationalism, the great I am is still becoming. There is more yet to come. This God is more than we dare to believe and will be more than what we can see. So rise, beloveds, and say it boldly, with conviction and with courage. What will you say? Take off your shoes and step barefoot into God's holy ground with humility. Open yourself to intimacy with the God of many names. Co-labor with God in the becoming of God's glory and promise for all people in this generation and for generations to come. May it be so.